Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to continue the series about most common philosophical questions according to the article by Gizmodo. So I'm actually going to deal with topic 2 and 3 together because they're actually related. So the second thing is philosophical question that is most common or most interesting, or even that they will never. So the premise of the thing, they say these are the eight great philosophical questions that we'll never solve. And again, this is how you know that this is just lazy journalism rather than anything serious. So the second question is our universe real? And the second one is, do we have free will? Now, obviously, if the universe is not real, then you don't have free will because you don't actually exist, right? And if it wasn't real, then what are you doing? Exactly. So, I mean, you know, where does all of these senses come from? So basically, let's get into it, right? So the question that they ask, is the universe real? And this now basically boils down to what's actually becoming very, very popular sort of speculation, where people wonder, do we live in a simulation, right? And this was, in some sense, Descartes didn't ask if we were living in a simulation, but basically his theory was somewhat along those lines, where he was like, could it be a demon deceiving me into thinking that I am having these thoughts and experiences, but I'm not really. So in more modern times, they talk about simulation. Do we live in a simulation now? Because we live in the age of computers and computer games. So this is actually relevant quite a lot to gaming. We see how sophisticated games can be. So imagine you were like this character now in the game. It's like, is any of this real? How do we know? So this is actually a question of epistemology in a lot of ways. How do we know that things are real? How do I know I'm not just having a hallucination? This is all a hallucination. How do I know that we don't live in a simulation? Could we be in the Matrix? We've all been. Then maybe the machine takeover has already happened and we just don't know it. We're living in a Matrix, sort of thing. And so yeah, it's a very deep philosophical question in terms of our epistemology. How do we know that? How do we know what we know, what we do know, and how do we know that it's not a product of our imagination or some sort of outside influence that is manipulating us or deceiving us in some fashion? This guy is annoying. Or deceiving us in some fashion. How do we know this? Now, in the most basic sense, there is something that is ironically known in philosophy that is called a properly basic belief. And basically, what it stipulates is certain beliefs are so fundamental and rudimental to our sort of daily operations of life that if you didn't hold them to be true, then your whole life would be self-defeating. You simply couldn't operate in the world at all, right? Imagine you had to, before you did anything or believed anything, right? And this is sort of actually the naive empiricist, where they're like, oh, you shouldn't believe anything that cannot be proved by absolute fact and this and this. It's like, imagine you actually lived that way and you wouldn't do anything in your life unless it was conclusively proven with a double-blind placebo group, study. And then it's like, no one operates in that way when it comes to their beliefs. You know what I'm saying? It's completely it's completely ridiculous to expect that this should be any kind of a standard for believing in things. Now, certain things you want that. So in philosophy, we talk about epistemic justification versus a pragmatic justification, right? Can I justify this belief? Now, if you were going to go have a surgery, let's say you're going to have open heart surgery, you would require very, very high epistemic justification for believing that the surgeon is actually capable of doing what he says he does, right? Which makes sense, sort of thing. It's like, hey, this guy's going to open up my heart. I better make sure that he knows what the hell he's doing, right? So you would want very high epistemic justification. right? But should I ask this girl out on a date, or should I not ask this girl out on a date? It doesn't require high epistemic. It's like, am I now going to go do a bloody a double-blind study and on her personality? Am I going to stalk? Am I going to stalk her for 2 months to find out all her habits and see whether I'm the kind of guy she likes? It gets ridiculous, sort of thing. Should I take the job or not? Should I? In fact, the majority of things in your life require no more than pragmatic justification, right? Does this help me? Does this help me navigate my world in a meaningfully, in a practical way, without being completely ridiculous, sort of thing, and stuff like that? Can I operate in the world? Can I get things done? Sort of thing is pragmatic justifications, and that's basically when we say something that like a pragmatic, where the pragmatic encroaches on the epistemic. So basically, due to pragmatic considerations and stuff like that, the pragmatic need encroaches on the epistemic. How can we say? The pragmatic need encroaches on the need for massive epistemic justification, that I have to have sort of some perfect certainty, mathematical certainty, scientific experimental certainty, in order to believe a particular thing, because that would just not be feasible. You wouldn't be able to manage it, kind of thing, right? And so on and so forth, right? I'm about to die. Like for example, with the coronavirus, right? There's like, here's this completely new, vaccine. Is it tested? Is it not tested? Do we know what it does? Is it going to make people grow horns? Who knows, right? But in those days, the medical community decided, whether for right or for wrong, that the pragmatic encroaches on the epistemic, and therefore the need was great enough that we just take the vaccine because the risks are there and there's a pragmatic need for it, sort of thing. Although there was a significant amount of hypocrisy, because if the pragmatic encroaches on the epistemic, then they should have allowed us to try anything off-label, but they obviously refused, for people to do that, sort of thing. It's like, either you take the vaccine or you go home and die, kind of thing, was basically the attitude, which then goes into moral and ethical considerations, which they've actually launched an investigation here in the UK, interestingly enough, on that particular issue, on what actually went wrong and how all the things that were done wrong, and hopefully a few heads roll because of that. But anyway, that's besides the point. So, does the universe really exist? And all of that sort of thing, right? So, well, at the end of the day, so when we say, well, how do we think of this in a sort of how can you say, pragmatic way, right? So Descartes basically says, I think, therefore I am. In some ways this is good, in some ways this is not good and stuff, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's sort of the debate between mostly between how can you say, on the religious side, sort of the presuppositionalists versus the classical foundationalists, and as well as the how can you say, the materialist versus the sort of more faith-oriented ones, in terms of how do you resolve this issue, right? But for the purposes of this channel, we'll simply say, listen, let's ask two questions. If it is real, what then, right? If it is real, well, then nothing changes, right? We carry on behaving in the way we're behaving. If it is not real and you came to understand this, what would change? Would you then go and, what would you do if it wasn't real? Let's say this was a simulation, this is an illusion, and this is whatever. Nothing would, basically the only thing that would change in your life is if you took that revelation like really seriously, you would basically be unable to live, because it's like, well, this is all fake. It would demoralize you. It would be, there's a lot of things that wouldn't be possible, sort of thing, right? And this is the interesting thing. What's his name in the Matrix? What was his name? He eventually ended up betraying all of them. He like, well, ignorance is bliss, right? He when he was talking with the agents, he's like, I know that the stake isn't real, but you know what? Ignorance is bliss. The other way of living is unlivable. Right, sort of thing. But obviously, in that sense, there was a real, there was the possibility of escaping the Matrix, and the reality was significantly more. Reality was crappy. Let's in every way imaginable, sort of thing. Life was really, really crappy. So, in the Matrix, that's where they fail. It's not between it's how can you say, basically the choice was a good reality versus a crappy reality, and obviously who wouldn't choose the good reality, sort of thing. I mean, very few people would choose, in reality, if we're thinking pragmatically, right? Let's say the Matrix was true. Let's say there is no God, for example. The totally materialistic, atheistic universe, and you came to this realization, and now it's like, well, aliens or machines that are controlling me. It's like I will live a certain life in the simulation, and then you basically you basically become fuel for machines. Well, how's that different to the atheist view at the moment? It's like you become, in the Matrix, you become food for machines. On the atheistic worldview, you become food for worms. What's the difference? You understand what I'm saying? It's like, what does a simulation theory change about your existence? It doesn't really change a whole hell of a lot. In fact, it's no different to just believing in atheism, right? The universe is essentially a kind of a simulation that's basically run on the rules of evolution. There's this algorithm that runs that makes you, that evolves creatures, that evolves humans, that evolves your life, and things just carry on. And that's it. Everything that is apparent to you exists, for the most part, in your senses only. There's no real truth or real. There's not a lot that can be said for a universe like that. Which incidentally is not a lot that can be said for a universe, if atheism is true, a universe that's purely materialistic. It's like, there's not much of a difference there, except that if it's a simulation, and then this is the ironic thing, right? If we are in a simulation, well then, who is the simulator? Right, it's one of those interesting things, is that concepts like simulation theory and stuff like that exist only in a society which has basically rejected the existence of a deity, right? But ironically, if you believe that it is a simulation, you kind of run face plant into the return of a God hypothesis again, because it's like, well, who's responsible for the simulation? The simulations don't just come about by themselves, right? On their own. And if you do say, yes, well, the simulation comes about on its own, there is no simulator, well, then how is that different from an atheistic universe subject to evolutionary processes? It's no different, sort of thing. So the whole philosophy is just totally misguided and self-defeating. It doesn't really get you anywhere, right? So the only real option is, at the end of the day, is ultimately atheism or Christianity or theism, right? I'm a Christian, so that's your only options, really. There you are, you scoundrel. So yeah, those are your only options, really. What are you actually left with? And now here's the problem that ties on to the second question, was like, do we have free will? Now it's become increasingly popular amongst atheists to say, no, we don't have free will. It's all just chemicals in the brain. Well, I mean, this is also self-defeating, right? Because if you have no free will, then you've got no basis for taking the justice system seriously. Because if you've got no free will, you're not responsible for anything you do, right? At all. There's no then, and if you're not responsible for anything you do, and if science you're not actually rational. You think you're rational, but it's an illusion. You're not actually rational. You don't actually make free will choices. There's no such thing as free will, which is necessary for choice. There's no love, because the choice is necessary for love. So there's no love, there's no choice, there's no science, there's no free will, which means there's no actual evil. There's actually no such thing as evil. There's no such thing as good. And so here's the interesting thing: if we were in a simulation, and if we did actually have no free will, you would never know it. You wouldn't be able to know it, because if everything is just a simulation, right? Or even in like evolutionary theory, if you are just a product of chemicals and blind chances and stuff like that, you have no reason to trust your mind. You can't even say you have a mind, because a mind is a metaphysical thing, right? You can't even say you have a mind. There's no reason for you to believe you have a mind. So if you don't even really have to you've got no reason to believe anything. You can't say you're rational, because you don't have free will. Rationality, free will is a requisite of rationality, because you can reason either this way or that way, depending on whatever. You're not just a computer that's forced to go along with in an algorithmic way, in one particular way, sort of thing. You completely demolish. It not only is it unlivable, but it destroys the possibility of logic. It destroys the possibility of everything, really. If this is all really a simulation, and we don't really have free will and all that kind of stuff, then I haven't said anything true. I haven't even said anything. I'm just saying, this is all just noises being made by, something. We don't even know what. I know if everything's just a simulation, we don't even really know what we are. So it destroys our concept of what it means to be human. It destroys our concept of ethics, because what are ethics then on this, sort of thing. Because if I kill a person, then I'm not really killing anyone. Not only am I not responsible because I didn't choose anything, but I'm not actually. If everything's just a simulation, then I haven't killed anyone, at all, sort of thing. I haven't done anything wrong to anyone, So, the whole thing is just totally self-defeating. It's just totally unlivable philosophy. Is it just me, or I can't get out of here? Oh shucks, I took the wrong way, didn't I? It's totally unlivable, self-defeating, incoherent, sort of thing. If any of these things were true, if we are living in a, if it is a simulation, we don't have free will. If we don't have free will, we don't have choice, we don't have love. Basically, we undermine literally everything that means to be a human being. We undermine every single thing that we've come to establish as cornerstones of society. Things like fairness, justice, law, culpability, sort of thing. If you don't have free will, then you neither believe in anything, nor do you disbelieve in anything, right? So, and this is actually, interestingly enough, the atheists and the Calvinists, because Calvinists typically don't believe in free will, even though sometimes they might pay lip service to free will. They will say, no, there is, but no, they don't. Calvinism and atheism, basically, because interestingly enough, atheism is basically it has basically, as a worldview, atheism commits itself to simulation theory in some way, right? That we are just a product of something. It's probably worse than the simulation theory, because at least in simulation theory there's a simulator and there could be some purpose or meaning to things, or whatever the case might be. But in atheism, we're basically in a simulation with no simulator, sort of thing, right? So atheism has got all the defects of simulation theory. It is just a simulation, and then your thoughts are simulations. You're not really thinking anything, and more so because there's not even a simulator that could maybe somehow engineer, meaning or thoughts, or imbue us with, or imbue some sort of purpose, or even get you to a point where you might maybe have some possibility of free will, and stuff like that, kind of thing, So if you wouldn't even know it, if we were in a simulation, you wouldn't even be able to know that we were in a simulation, because you're just part of this simulation, and you've been programmed to think that way. Even the question, are we in a simulation, is not if we were in a simulation, then the question, are we in a simulation, is not even a question. No one is asking. It's just some entity in an algorithm making noises that it was programmed to say, which is not really anything. So the whole thing is really so the idea, so basically the idea that this is a question that can't be solved is just, whoever wrote this article has obviously never studied much philosophy or even thought about these questions in any meaningful way, sort of thing. The author, if you believe in simulation theory, you undermine your own existence, and you undermine your existence. You undermine the meaning of any action you've ever taken. It's a totally senseless way of thinking. And if you had to take it seriously in any way whatsoever, it's totally self-defeating. That's basically the bottom line of it, especially on this free will front, man. I really don't understand how people can. Now, granted, there are a lot of people out there who give up their free will, right? Whether it be to a demented ideology, or whether it be to a religion. A lot of people give up their free will to, like, some cult leader who basically tells them what to do all the time. Or some sort of coercive authority. You get this in science as well. There's a lot of coercion these days in science, especially with all the social justice stuff and stuff like that goes into science. They're telling you, well, there's certain things you're not allowed to ask questions to. So ironically, in the run away from religion, a lot of people have actually become just as fundamentalist about the things they believe in as some of the most rabid religionists out there, sort of thing. It's quite unfortunate, sort of thing. A lot of people have even been saying, and I'm not just talking about religious people. Even if you think about, like, Brett Weinstein, he's an atheist and stuff like that. He talks about the coercion. There's free and open, transparent inquiry is no longer a thing in even in universities anymore, right? Peer review has basically become peer pressure. It's and stuff like that. It really is quite horrible. It's you can't live in a universe like that and have any kind of freedom or a sensible society, which is self-evident. Society is basically there's a lot of things that are just they don't work anymore because people are not allowed to question. People don't get along so much anymore. It all starts looking quite totalitarian, doesn't it? Sort of thing. All the fighting and stuff like that. It really is quite unfortunate, sort of thing. Far from being an unsolvable thing, it's actually not unsolvable. If you value anything, first of all, the fact that you do exist and that you do have free will and that you do have thoughts, and you can love and you can be responsible for things and stuff like that. these are properly basic beliefs, and so a properly basic belief, in the absence of a defeater for that belief, you are fully justified in believing it to be the case. And so this is the thing, right? These people that believe we don't have free will, or who believe in simulation theory and stuff like that, what a lot of them don't realize is that unless they have really, really good evidence or really, really good arguments in favor of those worldviews, then we are fully justified in believing what our five senses and our thoughts tell us about what the world is like, and what is true and what is real, sort of thing. We have no reason to disbelieve these things. You know what I mean? Without being completely self-defeating, as it were. And then now, not only that, but considering that, we have every reason to deny these people their philosophy or their speculations as nonsensical, because we have arguments that are absolute defeaters, right? If we did live in a simulation, then all of our thoughts, all of our epistemology, our ability to actually know anything would be undermined, because you're just a simulation. So you can't believe that in truth, for example, because you have no ability to assess the truth, because you are merely a simulation. So everything you say and do and think that you think is true is not really true. It's just the simulation playing out, kind of thing, right? So that makes that whole business quite impossible. So that's as far as I'm concerned, it's a devastating defeater. We obviously have free will, because without free will, there would be you would basically obliterate the possibility of love for love. There could be no such thing as a justice system without the assumption, or because the very foundations of the justice system is that you have free will. I mean, it's even inculcated into our law, right? It's like if the homicide, was it culpable or not? Was it premeditated or not? You get a harsher sentence if it was premeditated versus if it was just on the spur, kind of and in the heat of passion. So what they call crimes of passion, can we be said to have a crime of passion? Stuff like that, And so these are very important considerations. We would, there's just so much about society that would be undermined. What we believe is part and parcel about being a human being, that would just be undermined. You could no longer believe it at all. If we were living in a simulation, if we didn't have free will, and all these kinds of things. It really leads into absurdity, and this is where I could maybe introduce to you guys the concept of a transcendental argument, right? Transcendental argument basically is, in a lot of ways, it's like, well, in order to deny, if I accept your premise, if I accept there's two ways it can be done. If I accept the premise and I can take it to its logical conclusions, I can show you that it's absurd, right? So it's like a reductio ad absurdum, right? Or I could say, well, hang on, if you, in another sense, I can show that it's absurd, because I can say it assumes the thing that it's attempting to deny, right? So, for example, if a person were to say, well, I believe we live in a simulation, right? Then I could say, well, here's the problem. In order to say that, you have to believe that you have free will, which is impossible on simulation theory. So if true, it's also not true. Then your belief is not true, right? Because it's not actually a belief, because you don't have free will, and you don't have the possibility of knowing that if it was true, right? Because you destroy epistemology, you destroy knowledge. You basically destroy any capacity humans have for establishing the truth, whether scientifically or philosophically, through reason, because you demolish human reason. So in one sense, I could say, well, if true, it's like, in order to make that statement, you have to assume the thing you're denying, which is incoherent and self-contradictory. You can't do that. But also, if true, it reduces to absurdity because, well, if true, then it's also not true. It's self-contradictory sort of thing. Like, for example, and one of the things that one of the classic ones is people who say there's no such thing as truth, right? And so you simply ask them, well, do you believe that? Do you believe that statement to be true? If they say yes, well, then there's obviously such thing as truth, because that statement is true, and if that statement is true, then it's also false. So that's kind of like a transcendental argument. It's like you can't, if you go beyond the statement to what the statement is saying, what the statement presupposes, in order to be said, it's like it completely undermines itself. It's total nonsense, basically. Right, the person has to assume, in order to make the statement, there is no such thing as truth. The person assumes that that the statement is true, and assumes truth, tacitly affirms truth while denying truth. So he assumes the thing that he's denying, and then on things like simulation theory and stuff like that, in order to make that statement and say, I believe the statement to be true, a true statement about the world, he's assuming that he can make true statements about the world. He's assuming that he can investigate the world in such a way as to gain that kind of knowledge in order to say conclusively that we do live in a simulation, sort of thing. And all of these things are undermined. These things are not available to the person who believes that we're just a simulation and that his mind is the product of his simulation, because then so are his opinions, so are his beliefs. None of them actually belong to him as a rational human being. You no longer have the right to these views. You no longer have the right to believe that you really have your mind, that a mind is your own, and that your mind isn't just what's been programmed by the simulator and stuff like that. So this is essentially where it ultimately gets you. You can't live it, you can't reason it, you can't rationalize it. It undermines, if true, it undermines itself. It assumes the things that it denies, which means that whilst denying that, it affirms it, sort of thing. Like the thing, there's no such thing as truth. It's like the statement itself proves that truth exists, sort of thing, because it can't say that unless it assumes the thing, affirms the thing by saying that by marshalling it in order to make itself known. So yeah, it's a big problem, sort of thing, and shows people are not thinking clearly. And so yeah, this is definitely, again, contrary to the article, that the article's assumption that it can never be resolved. That's simply nonsensical. It simply shows that they don't actually know enough about philosophy, sort of thing. And this is one of the interesting things, just to take the whole thing a little bit further, and maybe almost like a psychoanalysis of people that entertain these kinds of ideas and notions and stuff like that, is most of the time people don't actually want answers. They seem to be more entertained by ignorance, sort of thing. And then in other ways, it's like, especially with people who are writing journals and stuff like that, they're not actually, which is why I don't read the vast majority of stuff that exists out there. I don't bother reading, because they are not, how can I say, the industry of blogs and a lot of journalism, especially journalism, especially a lot of the they have there's no vested interest in actually teaching you anything in any kind of sensible way. It's like the magician. Why are you interested in going and seeing the magician? Well, because it's a mystery kind of thing. It's the mystery itself, the not knowing itself, is in a way the tantalizing bit of the experience, sort of thing. And the only way that people can make anyone read these articles, right? Because this is the thing. Instead of reading like philosophical papers, what are people doing? They're reading these kinds of blogs and articles, these so-called journalistic articles, right? Why? Well, it's because it gives, first of all, it gives the appearance of being intellectual without actually being intellectual. And B, because it poses there's this mystery, there's this thing that no one can solve. it's how can I say? It gives that salacious air of, oh, this is mysterious, oh, this is interesting because it's mysterious, sort of thing. It's more sensationalist than it is actually rational in any kind of way. So that's what it's sort of trying to get at. That's what it's sort of trying to play at, and it's sort of taking, how can you say? It's almost like in the same way that drugs take advantage of people by playing on their desire for an experience rather than something of substance. It's sort of, that's what these so-called journalistic articles are actually doing. It's sensationalism. It's like, oh, no one's discovered the answer to this. You're almost like those things, when you're on social media and you see that like blog post on Facebook, it's like 90% of people were not able to solve this puzzle. Can you solve it? It's like, no. It's like, that's totally, it's totally nonsensical. They're just trying to rope you in with silly things like, oh, no one's been able to solve this. Oh, this is such a mystery, and it's like, oh, why don't you continue reading this article in order for us to actually tell you nothing? It's like, and this is the weird thing, right? It's like, if you take the title of the article seriously, which is, these are the questions that no one has ever resolved, that we can never resolve. They've just basically told you from the title, from the opening thing, that the article is completely worthless. It's totally pointless reading it because they can't tell you anything, right? So all you need to do is just skim through it to find out what the questions are that no one can resolve, and then just stop reading it, kind of thing. It's because, well, if no one solved it, then they haven't solved it and they're not capable of solving it, so why am I going to bother? They completely undermine any reason you would have to read the article. It's really silly. The whole thing is really very, very silly. So yeah, well, anyway, that's my take on it, guys. Do we live in a simulation? The answer is no. Do we have free will? The answer is yes. And what's the main justification? Well, the main justification is because if those things are true, we couldn't even ask the question in the first place. The question itself would be meaningless. The question, then you didn't actually answer a question. The question isn't a question, right? If true, then the question was not actually asked by anyone. The question the question doesn't exist. The question is not nothing, is not anything, which means the whole thing is completely pointless and self-defeating, right? And unless the person positing the thing provides you with a stronger justification for believing it, then you are fully justified in believing in the deliverance, shall we say, of your five senses, which basically says, no, I do have free will, and yes, the world does exist, and no, it's not a simulation, right? You would need a very, very powerful defeater in order to overthrow the power and the force of your daily experiences. I mean, that's just that simple. So, ladies and gentlemen, that'll be it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that was of interest to you. Ta-ta until next time.